The Battle of Britain is about to begin.
Be Christ, we got tanks up there. Let's follow a range on B Christ. I'm coming out right on the target right now. I've got a couple of these right in front of me. I'm going after it. Right, I got him.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Lead Pursuit Podcast. Tonight we've got something special for you. It's another spotlight episode. And you know what? We're going to do things a little bit differently this time. We're going to follow the same format we usually do and cover the same kind of history light, as Steve likes to call it. And we're also going to get into, what makes these aircraft maybe interesting in history, but also on the table. But it's going to be a combo episode, and we're doing that because maybe you have your Midway starter set, and you've painted some Zeros, you've painted some Wildcats. So we're going to do a Wildcat and Zero Spotlight episode. So with me today, I have Jason Fernandez from California. Say hi, Jason.
Hello, everybody. It's great to meet you all. I'm happy to be here.
We're going to find out more about Jason, where his head's at. But we also have from across the pond, Leslie. Say hi, Leslie.
Hi, Brett.
And Steve's with us. Say hi, Steve.
Hey, how's it going, everybody?
Cool. Well, let's get into this thing. We're gonna forego our usual show stuff with talking about events and hobby progress. We're just gonna get right into this spotlight episode. Since it is a combo episode, I guess maybe it might go a little longer. So we're gonna try to ring these guys for their knowledge. Now, if you've not listened to a spotlight episode before, you may not know that we try to cover a little bit of history, cover a little bit about the game with each aircraft, but we also try, for your benefit, to not force you to listen to Steve and I pontificate or attempt to share knowledge on this aircraft, because, hey, we're not the smartest guys in the room, and that's why we have Jason with us and why we have Leslie with us, because these guys know a heck of a lot more about these aircraft than Steve and I probably ever will. So let's start with Jason. Jason, tell us a little bit about where you're from and how you got into gaming and all that good stuff.
Yeah, my name's Jason Fernandez. I'm from San Jose, California. I'm a typical Generation X California kid. My gaming background's a little varied. I was into like sci-fi games when I was like in junior high. Kind of grew out of it. Went out in the world, did some working. Later on, as I got older, a couple years back, I got back into gaming. Really painting was really what I got back into, and the gaming just kind of came naturally. And that's where I actually discovered Blood Red Skies back in 2019, 2020, and just kind of really fell in love with it, and really enjoyed this game system, and I'm happy to talk about it. And it combines my love of airplanes and history, so what's not to love?
That's awesome. That's how it happens. How about you, Leslie? Where are you coming from, and how'd you get into gaming? You've been doing a lot of gaming, I understand.
Yeah, well, I started gaming when I was about 9 years old, with a set of ancient rules called Derek Sharman's rules for the classic period. And I eventually ended up building a 28mm Spartan army and a 28mm Persian army. Sorry, they were 25mm in those days. And I sort of gamed up until I was about 18. Then I had started work, did a little bit more gaming when I came out of work and went back to college. And then when my daughter was born, dropped out. And then when my daughter was a bit older, I started playing science fiction and fantasy games, and gradually reverted back to historical gaming over time.
I seem to remember you have kind of an interesting story how you got into Blood Red Skies specifically. Wasn't that kind of like by accident?
Yeah, I went to the Warlord joint day where they were showing you how to play Blood Red Skies and Cruel Seas. I brought the ticket and saw on the ticket that you needed Blood Red Skies. So literally the day before the event, I brought Blood Red Skies at the gaming store, and I think I've now played an awful lot more Blood Red Skies than I have Cruel Seas. Don't know why. Probably a better system.
That's awesome. Hey, I want you to also share with our audience some of the work you did on. You were a huge collaborator for our effort to come up with some campaign rules, which seems to be kind of moving forward and may soon be something that folks out there can get their hands on. Can you share the work you did towards that effort?
Well, during the UK lockdown, I didn't have a lot else to do, so I basically went through aircraft production values and produced the availability charts. Wasn't very much. Give us something to do when I wasn't allowed to go outside.
It wasn't much for you. You were like a machine, man. You had so much data. It was very impressive, and we thank you still for all the effort there. All right, so guys, let's get into this. Who wants to go first? Raise your hand. Wait, okay, Jason's got his hand up. All right, so Jason's here to talk with us about the Wildcat. Now, why is it that we picked you to discuss the Wildcat?
Well,
Come on, man.
That's a really good question. So I have two favorite planes. My Army plane is a P-40. My Navy plane is an F4F Wildcat. And I love the utility of the little booger. I've been chasing these planes for years. I've been studying them. When I was a little kid, my grandfather was a radio man on an escort carrier in World War II. And I used to build models for him all the time when I was a little kid. There's one right there. And the Wildcat was always one that, I don't know, it kind of clung to me because it was kind of an underdog. It was a little maligned, but there was something behind it. It held the line for a long time, and it really held that line until better, faster planes could come in, and it did a lot better than I think it was given credit for, in all honesty. We've spent some time on our Friday chats, and I'm glad we've gotten to get to know each other better. And I think that you've enjoyed our conversations together, and that's probably why you selected me.
Yeah, well, I've heard you talk about your knowledge of really all things Pacific theater. I think has been pretty impressive, and you're certainly knowledgeable about the aircraft you're going to talk about today. How about you, Leslie? How is it that the Zero, how did you stumble into this Zero discussion? I mean, really, how did you narrow it down to the Zero? Your knowledge is immense when it comes to aircraft of any type. It's been pretty impressive. But you've been playing some Zeros lately even.
Yeah, all comes down to a Christmas present, where someone brought me a 1/16th scale Hasegawa Zero model, and I just fell in love with the plane from that day. It was just, the model was fantastic. It was so detailed. There was over 100 parts for each wing, and you just sat there and built it. And I mean, it took me about 3 months to build, and normally I'd crank out a model in a couple of days. But I was just so intent on making sure every joint was smooth and it was filled in and it was properly and just ever since then. And then when I saw the stats for it in Blood Red Skies, I just suddenly went, yeah, this is, it's a perfect plane for me. It's agile, it's aggressive, and it just looks right.
That's cool. So your love for the Zero goes way back. That's kind of cool. This does seem like kind of the classic matchup, right? So pretty much everything I know about World War II in the Pacific theater, I learned from watching Baba Black Sheep on television as a kid. And I'm sure that's super accurate, and I'm probably well informed. But there were no Wildcats in that, to my knowledge. So I stand to learn a lot more, I think. I trust that my Baba Black Sheep background is pretty good. That's solid. That's a solid foundation. But let's get into it a little bit. Anyway, I was saying classic matchup. I'm thinking like puncher versus boxer, kind of, right? So, am I off base? Is like I'm thinking Wildcat's like pretty rugged, maybe pretty good firepower, maybe a little brutish, and then you've got the Zero. It's like real nimble, quick, that kind of thing. Is that close?
I think so. I think that's
All
pretty
right.
accurate.
That's
That's a Rocky 1 matchup.
Man, you've been studying up. This is impressive, Brett. I got to tell you, this is good.
Oh, yeah? All right, cool, man. Well, let's give Jason a chance to tell us a little bit about how the F4F got started, what like maybe its kind of initial design intention was and its role.
Yeah. Well, the F4F is really the progression of a series of carrier-based aircraft that that Grumman had been offering to the Navy starting in the early 30s. And you see similarities. The first offering is the F2F, and then it starts to morph, and you see the shape of the plane kind of taking place, really starting with the undercarriage that was designed by Leroy Grumman himself, that sturdy, narrow, rugged undercarriage that really kind of anchors the plane. And it really, you see its development as it gets a little bit larger, a little bit faster, a little bit chubbier. It starts to look more and more like a Wildcat. In 1935, the Navy started announcing that they were looking to add a high-performance carrier fighter to the fleet. And so immediately Grumman felt that they were a shoo-in. They started developing work on another biplane in 1935, which is the F3F. And about a year or so into it, they found out that the burgeoning Brewster Company had also been selected as a possible offering for the Navy, and they understood that they were working on an all-metal monoplane. And so they didn't want to be kept behind. So initially what they did was they just kind of literally ripped the top wing off of it and pretty much kind of submitted it almost as is with very little modification to compete against Brewster. So a few years later, in I believe 1938, when they're actually having the competition, Brewster just destroys them. They actually win the competition, initially get the contract for about 50 planes to start carrier, to an experiment in carrier operations. And it becomes apparent that, it was a bad performance from Grumman. They had engine problems in the very beginning of the performance test, and I believe at the landing, I think the test pilot nosed it in. So it was just a bad show for them. So they actually went back to the drawing board and started redesigning the plane. And they added a better Pratt & Whitney radial engine, a dual supercharged radial engine. They extended the rear a little bit. They kind of brought the rear stabilizer forward. They improved some of the internals for the pilot. They added the ability to, recock the guns midair. They also started settling on armament. They started, originally they were thinking 30 cals. They were even thinking of some nose-mounted ones at some point. But they, settled on the wing-mounted guns. They retested it. The Navy allowed them to retest, and they accepted the design. It performed fantastically. It also was able to go over 300 miles an hour, which was one of the core demands from the Navy. And so they started testing their planes, and it was actually became really apparent that the Grumman had a lot of abilities that the Brewster did not. The Brewster showed a lot of shortcomings, especially when it came to its undercarriage, which just was not up to the task of sustained carrier landings. So that's pretty much where the Wildcat development pretty much comes from. It's a series of fighters, or the end of a series of fighters, at least for that portion, until we move into bigger, better things like the Hellcat.
That's cool. Well, Leslie, tell us a little bit about sort of the initial design, inspiration, or intent there with the Zero. And I've got some questions about that name, Zero, and Zeke, and all those things you have to get us straight on, too.
Okay, well, the preliminary specifications for a new carrier fighter to replace the A5M were put out on May the 19th, 1937. Basically, operations of the A5M showed there was some shortcomings in China. So they basically created a fighter. Initially, there was 2 companies were involved, but only Mitsubishi actually submitted a fighter in the end. And one of the things is they wanted it to be capable of taking on the modern aircraft that they were seeing coming in, like the Bf-109, the Hawker Hurricane, the Spitfire, the Curtiss Hawk 75. In 1937, they produced a new specification that it must be capable of destroying all bombers, performing an escort mission, must have a maximum speed greater than 500 kilometers an hour at 4,000 meters in level flight, the ability to climb over 3,000 meters, which is just short of 10,000 feet, within 3 minutes 30 seconds from leaving the ground, and it must have an endurance of between 1 and 2 hours, with a long range of 8 hours. So,
Man, I got to jump in here, and this is why I love these episodes, right? Like me just being ignorant to just a lot of historical stuff. It never even dawned on me that the A6M Zero would be like a lineage of planes following the A5M, you know? So like that to me is just like, man, I just was looking that up on the side here, finding out about a whole new plane. I'm going to have to dig a little deeper now to see where that whole family of planes originally started, because that A5M is actually kind of a cool little looking plane too.
I'm not very familiar with Japanese aircraft really at all. I mean, I couldn't honestly tell you the difference at this point between an Oscar and a Zeke, and I could probably guess actually that's a little bit of an embellishment, but a lot of them to me look very similar. Is it A5M really pretty similar in look to a I guess what's now an A6M Zero? Is that right?
No, it would look closer to what you'd think of a classic dive bomber. It had fixed undercarriage, for instance.
Yeah, I got to tell you,
okay.
Looking at a picture of it here, it kind of reminds me a little bit of the Pea Shooter, to be honest with you. Like, it kind of has like that older air racer looking style to it. I kind of dig it.
I've heard the term HAMP before. Is that a derivation of the Zero or something? I understand they may look similar. I first heard the term HAMP when I was trying to find some decals, and the decal supplier said, well, I don't have that particular one in a Zero, but I have it for the HAMP. And I was like, okay. I had no idea what that was. I presume that's like an allied designator, like the term Zeke would be for some aircraft.
Yeah. Not sure who the HEMP is. The thing about the Zero and the Zeke, basically the Americans codenamed all the Japanese fighters with names, and Zeke was the designation for the Zero. The Mitsubishi, the A6M, to give it its full title, is a Mitsubishi Navy Type Zero carrier fighter. The reason they get the Type Zero is because it's based on the imperial year, which was the imperial year 2600. So the last designation was Zero. So basically the colloquialism of Zero was used. I mean, one of the main difference between the Zero and the Oscar is the Oscar's the Imperial Japanese Army plane, and the Zero is the Imperial Japanese Navy. And they didn't actually like each other very much.
Well, you know what? There is a lot of stuff that I find super confounding about Japanese stuff in World War II. Like even just their organizations and stuff, I can't keep straight, much less the nomenclature, their aircraft. But that's why we have you on, because you're teaching me something. Cool. Well, let's talk a little bit about notable advantages. Let's start with, let's let Leslie start. Tell us what really makes the Zero shine.
Well, in the real war, what made the Zero shine was its ability to fly a combat radius of about 1,500 miles, and actually fight at that distance. It wasn't a transferred distance. It was fly 1,500 miles, fight, fly 750 miles, fight, fly home. I mean, there was so many different versions. I mean, one of the things is with the Zero is when it was first, a similarity between the Zero and the Wildcat, which I didn't know, was the first version of the Zero, which used a Zysero 13 engine with a twin prop, proved to be underpowered and had a very poor performance. They changed it in the A6M2 Model 11 to the Nakajima Seika 12 engine, which had 940 horsepower and a three-plate prop, and that actually exceeded the specification. So very similar. The plane was almost deemed to be a failure, and they went away, changed the engine, did some other little bits and pieces, and produced basically the best plane in 1940s.
So it sounds like it could go a really long way. It's super nimble and has a lot of power. It's fast too, right?
Yeah, it was fast. It had a water boost from the A6M2, so they could boost it quite often. And in one of the pilots, Saburo Sakai, when he was flying it, he quite often used to say that they'd run it very, very lean, even in combat, and use the water boost to, outmaneuver and out confuse the American pilots, because the American pilots couldn't see what it was. It also the boosting like that could also account for the number of aircraft the Americans thought they shot down, because when the boost went in, it produced a huge black pool of smoke. So the pilots the American pilots often thought they'd shot down a Zero, when all it was the pilot had just engaged the boost.
Wow, that's an interesting factoid I never would have thought of. That's pretty amazing. All right, Jason, what about strengths for that Wildcat? What are some standouts?
Oh, yeah. Well, it definitely is going to have an edge in firepower. The F4F3, had four 50 cals, and the F4F6, F4F4, F4F-4 would have 650 cals. It was a very, very rugged airframe. It could take a tremendous amount of punishment. So pilot protection, resealing fuel tanks. It was a very, very tough plane. It was very hard to bring down. I actually remember, speaking of Saburo Sakai, I read an account of his where, he was dealing with a Zero, and he'd already got him pretty much in a position where he wanted to stop using his cannon rounds to conserve them for the rest of the fight. And he said, I'm just going to finish this guy off with my machine gun. So he turned off his cannon, and he kept pouring rounds into the thing, and pouring rounds into the thing, and pouring rounds into the thing, and it wouldn't go down. And he was just amazed that it would just keep flying. He had to go back to the cannon. I believe I don't even think he even shot the plane down. I'm not 100% sure. But that was the point, that he just was amazed at how tough it was.
No, he didn't shoot it down, because he always complained. So. He complained that it was one that got away from him, because by the time he switched to cannon, they'd had basically to shoot it down, he'd have had to put himself into jeopardy.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And that's the toughness, and it dove pretty good. It was a pretty good diving plane. It wasn't as great as, like, say, a P-40 or a P-47, but it dove really well. I mean, it had a lot of weight to it, and that was kind of a problem with it.
Hey, Brett, I'm going to hit you with a fact here. You ready? An interesting Wildcat fact. And I know Jason mentioned this in, like, our pre-show thing, but I know this previously from my days gone by as a long-standing virtual fighter pilot ace, that the Wildcat, still in 1940, had manual hand crank landing gear. Crazy, right? And the only reason I know that is because I remember every time I would take off or land in that thing, I had to, like, spam the G key on my keyboard to, like, crank it like crazy. I'd just be sitting there, like, spamming away on the G key to get the gear down. But pretty late aircraft to still have manually controlled landing gear.
Yeah, I wouldn't have thought that would have been the case. I would have just kind of expected some type of, mechanical system that made that retract at the push of a button. Wow.
Yeah, I believe it was 28 turns up, 28 turns down, if I recall.
Yeah, I don't know that, but it was about 400 hits on the G key in the simulator. So,
Hey, Steve, since you're a current civilian pilot, what's a tail dragging high performance acrobatic aircraft or aerobatic aircraft? Is it Laser 2000 or something like that? I can't recall.
I would say probably if you were gonna get a tail dragging high performance airplane, you're probably gonna look at like a Pitts. You know, it's a little biplane.
So I'm thinking about a podcast I listened to where the guy that was being interviewed actually flies a restored or working Zero, and he compared its performance to an aircraft that I vaguely recognize and just can't recall the name of. And I can picture it in my head. It's a low wing monoplane.
Could be like a Vans something.
Yeah.
Like there's
Anyway,
some kit planes like that too, but.
Yeah, I thought it was pretty impressive because he was talking about like how twitchy it was and how powerful. Like I guess it's power to weight. It just he described it as being something you could really do a lot with.
Yeah, one of the biggest problems with the Zero was it was pared down weight-wise. So it was very, very light. I mean, if a Wildcat sneezed on it, it would probably fall apart.
Oh, that's a good point because in that same podcast, he talked about the skin, the aluminum skin was super thin and would easily deform just with hand pressure. If you were, I think he was discussing how just doing a walk around on the aircraft that you have to be very kind of careful because you could not bang into this aircraft. Everything was like you said was made to give it super lightweight. I presume for that long range, but also the maneuverability. It's interesting. So quite a contrast from what I'm learning to understand about this beefy Wildcat with its big hand cranked landing gear. So let's talk a little bit about disadvantages. Jason, you want to lead us off with like maybe some shortfalls of the F4F?
Oh yeah, and it goes back to that weight. That twin Wasp engine was a phenomenal engine, but it just could not get that sucker moving. It was very sluggish. It had a poor rate of climb. Those are the issues that it really had. It had a poor rate of climb. Visibility was okay on it, but the rate of climb and speed was an issue. And when they did add the extra guns, it did actually really slow down its rate of roll and really gave it real turning problems. So those are some of the things about the Wildcat. Its speed, it's not a fast plane, and its rate of climb is poor. Unlike the Zero, which had a phenomenal rate of climb.
So what do you think, Leslie? Is there anything that stands out as a sort of a disadvantage? We've already talked about it being super light. I'm guessing that might cause some challenges.
Try no self-sealing fuel tanks. So an incendiary round hits the fuel tank, it's going to explode. It's not even a question. If a Wildcat hit one of its for 50 caliber tracer round could go through the plane. I mean, you're talking about the thickness on the wing of being between 1 and 2.5 millimeters thick.
And the standard rounds they were using were AP incendiary.
Yeah, I mean, if that hit the fuel tank, it was going to explode.
So not super survivable, I'm guessing. I'm wondering too. It sounds like a really technically advanced aircraft for its time. Were there any challenges unique to just like maintaining a thing that sophisticated in forward air bases and stuff like that? Or?
It wasn't really as sophisticated as it looks. I mean, it was. I mean, one of the things is the lead designer, Jiro Hikoshi. He had worked with the Junkers German Design Bureau. They sent a couple of their designers over and they worked together. And for a lot of time, everyone thought it was a copy of a German plane or a British plane. But it was some of the concepts that they came up with was very much being able to turn, being able to hit. I mean, it had two 20mm cannons in its wings. I mean, for the time frame, two 20mm cannons in the wings. and two 7.7 mil 303 mounted in the nose. That's an awful lot of firepower in a very agile plane, so it can get on someone's tail. It's going to hurt them. But biggest problem, had no survivability, no protection for the pilot as well.
Oh wow! Did Japan produce the Zero throughout the war? Were there a lot of them made?
Somewhere between 10,400 and just short of 11,000, depending on whose figures you believe.
That seems like a pretty big amount. I'm trying to recall from memory how many like Spitfires or 109s were built. That still seems like a pretty big number of aircraft to be produced.
Yeah,
it persisted, right? It was constantly produced, or was it just like a early war thing, or?
No, it was constantly produced. I mean, they were even producing a new version at the end of the war. The A6M A6M8 with a 1560 horsepower Mitsubishi Kansai 62 engine. I mean, it actually was built, and there was some flying.
I'm always impressed by these aircraft that, as I guess a testimony to just how well designed they were, that they continued to see service for such a long time under such conditions, and they weren't, immediately obsolete, or, you know what I mean? That maybe some little tweak or something could be done to them to preserve their usefulness. It sounds like it certainly did that with the Zero then.
It was certainly modified heavily. I mean, there was replacements designed for it, and there was better planes designed. But if you've got the jigs available, why not just keep producing it? I mean, the later planes, the A6M8, actually had protection for the pilot and self-sealing fuel tanks. So it would have been an interesting plane if it got to fly.
How about the Wildcat, Jason? What can we learn about how many of those were produced and how long it persisted throughout the war, or whether it was, I kind of get the impression the Wildcat's an early war Navy aircraft and maybe was superseded by subsequent Cats of some kind?
Well, the answer to that, both those questions, is yes. It was produced throughout the war. Grumman built them up to about 1943. And after mid-43, they switched over to Hellcat production. And General Motors took over production of the Wildcats. And I believe they actually outproduced them. General Motors, I believe, produced about 8,700. I think the total numbers are around 11,000 between the two different producers. The General Motors version is a little bit different, and the reason why they stuck around, and it's a very basic reason, is a logistic reason. The faster planes were not able to land on the escort carriers. We always think of big fleet carriers as being the mainstay and the backbone of the U.S. Navy in the Pacific, but really, it was the escort carriers that were probably the backbone. They were doing convoy duty. I mean, the Casablanca class, I believe there's like 70 examples given. My grandfather was a radio man on an escort carrier in World War II. And, he used to tell me stories about how they'd watch the Wildcats come in, and they'd miss the deck a lot even with that. They'd have to, skip off and try again, or sometimes they'd miss the deck entirely, But the Wildcat was produced all the way till the end. GM was actually interesting because they actually... the variants they produced were a lot more like the earlier variants that the pilots actually really preferred, with the 4 guns. And they had an improved radial engine. They called it the Wilder Wildcat, kind of like the hotter sister kind of thing.
Wildcats were kind of used all over the place too, right? Didn't the RAF use Wildcats, and they were carrier based, and of course, Doug would be proud. I can recall that they were land-based at Guadalcanal, right? Marines flying them off air bases. But was that typical? I mean, were land-based Wildcats a kind of a normal thing, or were they predominantly carrier-based?
Oh, they were. There are examples of the RAF using them in North Africa. I believe 805 Squadron had about 30 or 40 of them, 1941, flying out of Egypt. The Fleet Air Arm, they absolutely loved the Wildcat. They were so happy to get Wildcats. remember before that, they were really dealing with planes that had a lot asked of them for the fighter role. They were either employing the Blackburn Skua or the Fairey Fulmar, which both planes, the Fulmar especially, performed much better than the Skua in that role. But it was a lot asking of a multi-role kind of plane. So they were very happy to get the Wildcats. I've listened to quite a few recent YouTube videos that have some great commentary on the Wildcat. Eric Winkle Brown has some excellent comments about the Wildcat, just espousing a lot of the things that I have said. They were designed from the ground up for carrier operations, which for the British Admiralty, it was kind of carrier operations, kind of a second thought. I think I don't think they really paid a lot of attention to it. As much as, like, say, for instance, the Japanese, their carrier operations development were incredible, and the U.S. was kind of kicking at their heels and doing their own kind of thing a little differently.
Well, since I've watched things like Tora 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 and Baba Black Sheep, I'm certainly aware that the Zero was used all over the place. How can you enlighten me, Leslie, how the Zero was used throughout the war? Maybe where and how?
Basically, the original A6M 211 wasn't actually a carrier-based aircraft. It was only the A6M Model 21 that was the carrier version. A lot of the...
I have no idea what you just said. I don't know what any of that means.
Yeah, I was going to piggyback on that too. Maybe enlighten some of us more casual listeners here, Leslie.
Okay, the Zero itself, there is a lot of different marks and versions of it. Basically, the A6M2 means it's like the original production version, if you like. And then they produced different models of that, the 11 and the 21. Basically, the 11 was the ground-based, the 21 was the carrier-based. They were virtually the same, except the carrier-based one, the wingtips folded so you could get more of them on the plane. And the carrier operations and land operations, because the Imperial Japanese Navy and the Imperial Japanese Air Force hated each other so much, to protect the ports around Japan, there would be Zero fighter groups created. And so literally anywhere they wanted to protect a land-based target, Zeros were sent. The Army Air Force might be there as well, but they wouldn't protect unless there was Army ships in there. And yes, the Imperial Japanese Army had its own ships and its own aircraft carrier. So just to show how much they hated each other.
Man, this is insanely awesome information. But me and my history light. Let's get into BRS a little bit. How does all this relate to Blood Red Skies? And I'm just gonna kick it off right away. I have the master list here in front of me, and a new one actually published today. Actually, just about an hour before this episode, right? So the F4F. Sitting at a 6 speed, a 1 agility, and a 2 firepower with robust, which what we've learned so far seems fairly reasonable, right? It has that robust, not very agile, so that that seems.
Where's the great dive?
No great dive, right? That'll be coming in a revision for an American aircraft. It'll be there. I'm positive. And the A6M Zero, 7 speed, so a little bit faster than the Wildcat, 3 agility, much more agile than the Wildcat, and 1 firepower, so less firepower with no stalling, which is like super tight turn, deep pockets, which kind of lends to what Leslie was saying about the long range, and vulnerable, which lends to the non-self-sealing fuel tanks and not a lot of pilot protection. So on first look to the layperson, if we're talking about these two planes coming in a box together, And I don't know, Brett. To me, as just the very much the student here, I don't know. Sounds like they got it pretty right with those. I'm curious to see where some of these guys might have gone a little differently.
What do you guys think? You have any? Would you have statted it different? Would you have assigned more traits if it was Leslie Red Skies or Jason Red Skies?
If I may, I think the Wildcat, unlike the A6M2 variants, the way they're statted, the Wildcat's a generalization. A little more, I'd say a little more of a generalization or a combination of several models maybe, and whereas the Zero variants are very specific. I think they more reflect the different models. I think the Wildcat maybe need another look. I like the beta stats, the lead pursuit stats for the Martlet 1 and the FM2 stats. I think look about right for me. For the earlier F4F 3 variant, the F4F4 variant, maybe this is actually perfect for it because it was more sluggish. That robust trait, having 6 cards, is pretty tough. We played this weekend, actually, Zeros and Wildcats, and we tested a couple different traits and some different doctrine cards just to see kind of how what a combination would actually work. We found adding some different theater cards and trait cards made a big difference, and then my friend Mike Tran, he actually played what I like to play with my deep pockets playing because I personally don't care for deep pockets. So I like to use the equipment card that's called Light Load, which allows you to exchange deep pockets for Great Climb. And that's a really fun combination. He really liked the climbing combination with being able to knock people down when they're trying to outmaneuver, and the great turning of the Zero.
Now, Jason, I gotta ask here. Okay, so it allows you. I'm not familiar with that equipment card. Is that an all or nothing card, or could you exchange like 3 of those for 3 great climbs? Could you split your deck then and have 3 great climbs and 3 deep pockets, or is it an all or nothing? How do you interpret that?
It's all or nothing. It's all or nothing. It basically, a designated friendly squadron may exchange deep pockets trait for great climb trait for the battle.
I'm gonna have to remember that. I think I can. I think at the
you'd like it.
I think at the next GOE I can rules lawyer that one to my favor. I'm gonna put that one in the little note there to maybe finagle that one.
I look at it this way. They always forget to mention equipment cards, so it's just like to say, well, they didn't allow it, but they didn't disallow it, so I'm going to use it.
What do you think, Leslie? Would you change anything for the Zero?
No, I think the Zero's about right. I mean, it has to be considered as vulnerable because, well, basically it was. I mean, you could almost give it super vulnerability. Any hit against it is a critical. But because there isn't any armor for it.
This conversation's reminded me of something we discussed maybe at a happy hour some time ago, or maybe even a previous LPP episode. We were talking about what if aircraft in Blood Red Skies could have 3 traits, but you only play 2. So when you come to the table, you play this game where it's 3, pick 2. So based on maybe whatever mission you're playing or whatever strategy you're trying to run or whatever kind of tricksies you're trying to play out, you have 3 traits for each aircraft potentially, and the best aircraft, I guess, would have 3 traits, but you have to pick which 2 are actually usable in the game. The reason I say that is because when I look at the F4F, I think, boy, Great Dive has some potential, right? Like it seems like it. You don't, I think they got it right in terms of like you have all these things it could have, but you had to just pick the best 2 that most represent that aircraft's performance. I think they did it right. But if you had 3, pick 2, now the game your gameplay might totally change. Imagine if you came to the table and you had, Great Dive. Is it just robust, the F4F?
Yeah.
So the F4, I'm not familiar with which one, honestly, and I should be, comes in the starter set. On the master list, the F4F3, which should be the earlier one, has robust and rapid roll.
Rapid roll.
So that would be more of that as Jason was talking about, as they progressed through and they started, giving it more armament and a little more armor and bigger engine, it kind of lost some of that roll rate. But yeah, I mean, the pick 3, pick 2 is kind of like probably the best idea I've had in about 9 years of my life. So I'm glad
That's
you
right.
like that also, Brett.
That was your idea, and it makes me think of things. I mean, like the Zero is it's maybe more obvious with the Zero because, man, Great Climb seems like a contender. I think you could easily give it Great Climb, deep pockets, and super tight turn, right? And you come to the table, you pick your 2, you're going to play for that fight. I think that almost creates an interesting like card battle before the game starts, Anyway, just an idea, just something that sounds like fun. But
it is interesting too when they stat these planes, right? So like the Wildcat and the Zero are obviously coming in a box together, right? And they're obviously designed to behave a certain way with respect to each other, which based on those 2 card designs and what we learned about it tonight, it sounds like they're really, really good against each other. And what happens as gamers is we kind of go that fantasy route and we're like, oh, we're going to fly Wildcats against P-51s, right? And then, you kind of get into these weird situations where the plane doesn't really act like that. But, I'd be curious to pick the brains of the people who stat them. Like how much when you're putting these stats on, is it in your brain that, oh, we want it to perform this way against this plane? And in that respect, in this box set, they seem pretty good.
So what historical or I say historical doctrine and or theater cards, that's how I meant to say that, do you think might pair with these aircraft, Jason? Do you think that, you only have robust, so I'm guessing there's probably not is there even a bonus card for robust?
Well, the only one is ram attack.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Robust.
That's you go. Put a bayonet on that thing. Get some Marine Corps aircraft.
Exactly. Put your head into it. That is a challenge, really. The plane actually is delivered when you buy the old sets. The old metal sets came with slashing attack as a doctrine for those, and none of the bonus traits actually work with it. So in that case, I say you go a little nutty and look at stuff like defensive tactics or something that would allow you to have a reaction and maybe get some kind of bonus movement out of the plane. Aggressive tactics is another one I like for doctrine cards. I'm not one to, I don't really care for like the numbers card too much, but this is one situation where I think it might fit. I think it kind of fits for the Wildcat. That gives you a couple of extra planes at at an average pilot skill.
Is a Wildcat pretty inexpensive?
It is. Matter of fact, I got the
It's
card.
23 points, I believe, for the F4F-4.
I like it. That's cheap. I'm thinking, that
23 points.
That 2 firepower plus robust. I mean, you could dish out some pain and you could kind of afford to take some risks maybe. Yeah. You could maybe start doing some stuff like, I don't know, opening shot, throw on some rockets. I mean, I don't know.
Dude, I'm doing it right now in my head. I'm doing the math in my head, right? So if I'm building a list, a 500-point list with these Wildcats, I'm taking 5 Wildcats, all right? All of them with skill 4 pilots. So you're still under 500 points. You still have 5 planes, right? Still get the 2 firepower, which I think is like a must. And then I'm pairing it with defensive tactics because that 1 agility is horrible. But if you could turn those incoming shots into deflection shots and have those 6 robust cards, I think that's a formidable list.
You could do your Steve Toth trick of changing those shots into head-on shots and do the Lord's work with that firepower 2 and robust. I don't know. That could hurt.
Yeah, grab the superior armament theater card. It gives 1 more firepower die.
All right, what about you, Leslie? So how are you playing this thing? What do you think's a great combo? I mean, I think the obvious, I'm not going to jump to it. I know Steve is, I think Zero is now his favorite aircraft.
I tend to run with defensive tactics for the doctrine card because you can't afford, you've got to mitigate that vulnerability. And of course, with the no stalling card, it's quite easy to get 2 shots in a turn on someone. It's also quite easy to get on people's tails. And with speed 7, it's quite easy to stay behind someone. I mean, I also use. I'm also a bit nasty because I do things like restrictive airfields on my opponents, and also give them supply shortages. Just to upset them a little bit.
That's what you do. It's a thing.
It's the Zero. You have to manage the boom chits. You know you're going to get them. So what you got to try and do. I mean, one of the things is I normally run a four shape version, and I put 2 veteran pilots, an ace pilot, and I also use Sapura Sakai because it just fits in lovely. And the unnamed ace, I normally use Cool Under Fire because Cool Under Fire, if you get shot at and you critically dodge, you take the boom chit off.
Sounds like some winning combos. Steve, I think Doug would probably do aggressive tactics. What do you
No
think?
doubt. Yeah, I mean he's the killer with the aggressive tactics. That no stalling pairs with everything, just like a tight turn would. So you get to keep reusing that aggressive tactics.
Well, the thing about Doug, he can see the Matrix, right?
Yeah, I mean
Keanu Reeves.
yeah, he's like that. I don't know, that movie with what's his face, Russell Crowe, A Beautiful Mind, where he's got like the triangles and shit floating in front of his face, and he's like, I don't know, he's got the eye for that. I don't have that.
I think aggressive tactics and super tight turn. I can't call it anything else. That's a smart gamer's combo right there. I think. I'm not smart enough to play that way. I gotta like shoot and fly away and come back and hope for, and then maybe have some tricks with some aces. But
every time we have one of these conversations, right? I think everybody with gaming kind of goes through their like ups and downs and kind of like where they have their gaming mojo and whatnot. Every time we have one of these conversations, I'm like, oh man, I got to get back on the board, or I got to get back in tabletop sim because I just want to try this stuff out. Like. I never really gave the Wildcats a second thought, and now I'm really thinking about. I'm like, man, I think I could really make those work in a little different list, and I think that's a fun thing. I think both of us, and I know Doug also, like we really like the scenario play. We really like the thematic scenario play. But the draw of the tournament is it allows you to do those things that you normally wouldn't do, right? And you get to do these different things. So man, I don't know. There might be a Wildcat list in my future.
I like I like that idea with the all fours pilot skill 4. I think that's. I don't know.
Yeah, 5-4s is pretty formidable, right? Like that, you don't see that very often. Usually, when you get those high skill level pilots, you're automatically down to a skill level 3 or 2 in there somewhere, mixed in with an ace, right? And the Yak Swarm lists that we see, where you could do that with the level 4s, they only have that 1 firepower, which really, like that 1 firepower is really just undesirable to me. So to have a plane at 23 points with 2 firepower, really, man, that really makes me do some thinking.
Yeah. Well, Leslie talked a little bit about some ace pairings. What do you think, Jason? Do you have any, ace skills you think would pair nicely with your ideas for some Wildcats on the table?
Yeah, I liked, what was the one I really liked? I liked Accurate. I thought that one was pretty good.
Really leaning into that firepower? Is that what's going on
Yeah,
there?
I thought that one was pretty good. And Aggressive, I really like, because you can outmaneuver and fire and
that's
in the same phase, which is a really good one.
Leslie, you like I know in the past I've seen you use Mother Hen to good effect. You think Mother Hen would be a good ace trait with some zeros?
No, I tend not to use it with the zeros, because I prefer to have the higher rated pilots. And mother hen really only works when you've got a large number of pilots, so you know you're going to get to use it.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah, so it'd be otherwise super situational, and you'd spend the points for it and never get to employ it, right?
Yeah. I mean, talking of aggressive, I mean, Saburo Sakai, his two traits are aggressive and comeback king. Yeah. Which, aggressive with someone who has effectively an extra agility point. If you get him in the right situation, I mean, even when you tail him, if he dodges, if he comes back neutral.
Yeah, the first thing that popped in my head about aces with the Zero was the right stuff, maybe just to disregard that vulnerable. But I don't know if that'd be worth it, because I don't know. It would just make it just drops one dice. I don't know.
Yeah, I like comeback king because basically, if cool under fire, in reaction to an ace being shot, if the dodge is successful, no boom chits applied.
That sounds better. Yeah, I like that.
I mean, I did run a version of my list without Saburo Sakai, where I had three aces, all with comeback, all with cool under fire, and my opponent shot my aces, and because it's a high agility plane, and so you got 8 dice, you're likely to succeed. I think I still had one of my my deep pockets cards at the end of the game.
Hey, Jace, what do you think about Tail Snapper on a Wildcat ace? That's double firepower if you're in
I
a
think
tailing.
that's a good card. That's a good card. I mean, if you don't get a success with that, you're probably rolling.
Yeah, I mean, you're rolling 9 dice, right? If it's a double firepower and he's an ace, you got the 5 for the ace, you got the 4, double it. I mean, you're rolling 9 dice for a hit there. And especially
rockets.
If we're talking about pairing it up against the Zero with that vulnerable, like, man, that's some boom shits you're racking up with that.
I played that card once with Eric Hartman, who has that as one of his traits, and I was pretty impressed with the work it did, man. If somebody's in front of you, if you got a tail on shot, it does the Lord's work. It's pretty impressive. So anyway, well, hey guys, look, we're almost at an hour. We've been talking about these aircraft. I really appreciate everything you've taught us. This discussion about the traits and maybe some different combos and stuff has been super fun. Steve, what are your thoughts? What are your takeaways?
All right, so I've just been sitting here making some notes through the episode, and truthfully, to put both of these in one episode kind of feels like we cheated a little bit here, right? Like, these are two planes that to cram this down to an hour was really doing them a disservice. I mean, we could have gone easily solo episodes with both of these. So one thing that stood out to me when they were talking about the armaments of the airplanes is, again, the Zero with the nose-mounted cannons, right? And it just, like, I cannot think of any aircraft except the P-38 in the United States Arsenal, and I guess like the Airacobra, right? Go ahead, Leslie.
The cannons were in the wings. It was the 303s were in the nose.
So nose-mounted machine guns.
Yeah.
But I can't think of, besides those two aircraft, I can't think of any U.S. aircraft that have nose-mounted armament. And, like, why was, like, something I want to research after this episode, why are U.S. planes predominantly have the wing-mounted machine guns, and we didn't go with any nose-mounted armament? So I'm really curious to dive into that a little bit.
It saved you setting up the synchro gearing around the firepower.
Yeah, you're not firing through an interrupter.
Yeah, the interrupter gear, and that actually has quite an effect. I was at the RAF Museum at Hendon, where they've got a World War I plane, and they have it set up with the interrupter gear, and it is literally with a high firepower gun like the 303, or especially with something like the 50 caliber, you're missing one in 7, 1 in 8 shots. And then if you put a 4-blade propeller on,
Dang, yeah. I mean, it just seems so deadly aiming wise.
Yeah, for the U.S., you don't see a lot of examples like that. The old Hawk series, the P-36s, you would see that, and that's kind of piggybacking on something that Leslie had pointed out for the time frame, how heavy the armament was. Because when they did have a lot of nose-mounted guns, they'd often be a combo, like 130 caliber and 150 caliber. They really hadn't gotten the math down yet on weight of fire, I think. Where you really see the nose-mounting armament being a real challenge is with the Italian planes. They're using Breda 50s, the Breda guns are really slow rate of fire. I'm talking like 400 round rate of fire. So you're firing that through an interrupter gear. You're really not putting a lot of time on target, with your lead. So that's interesting, a real interesting point. It's interesting to me how they all kind of go to wing-mounted guns. And I really think you'd see a lot more cannon armament on American planes if we had to go after bombers, like heavy bombers. I think you would actually have seen a lot more American planes with cannon armament. But frankly, the mission wasn't there.
With the Luftwaffe aircraft, it seems like, you get an escalation in the...
Yes, sir.
What you got, Leslie?
yeah, I mean, the Zero went to more and more guns. I mean, it ended up with one nose-mounted 50 caliber, 220 millimeters, and two wing-mounted 50 calibers, and the 220 millimeter. So that's an awful lot of firepower. Now you can see why they ended up having to put a 1,500 horsepower engine in to keep it up.
Wow, I didn't know.
Hey, Leslie, was the Zero a radial engine airplane?
Yes.
Yeah, just a single stage supercharger, if I recall, too. So it's definitely, it's definitely not really high altitude.
There was a single and there was a multi-stage. The A6M 4 was a high altitude version with a turbo supercharger.
Those aren't going to appear till 44 though. I think later in the war, as they're starting to run into more, heavy U.S. bombers.
Yeah. You're looking at 43.
Oh, okay. Oh, it's earlier than I thought.
Yeah, that's how Leslie is. You could say, "Hey, Leslie, I got this particular version, this variant of an aircraft. When was that available?" He'll pause for about 6 seconds, and then he'll give you a specific month and year. That's how he became a collaborator on the campaign thing. So,
yeah, this was awesome. I loved it. I learned something new all the time. Take away more stuff to research, and yeah, like Brett said, most of my research is just sending Leslie a message. It's pretty lazy research tactics, but
why strain yourself?
Yeah, thanks for coming on, guys. This has been great and really informative, and a fun discussion too about how some of this stuff translates onto the table for us. Any last thoughts from Jason, Leslie?
Well, I'm actually going to try a Wildcat list. I haven't even painted mine yet. It just never interested me until a couple of days ago, or was it the second last Friday get together, and Jason mentioned it, and I started looking at it and started researching it, and I started finding out more and more stuff about it. And I thought, okay, I'll have to have it a go.
Well, I know where you can get some paints.
How did you know I was going to try to plug Blue Falcon? I would say get yourself some good paint. Get yourself a U.S. Navy set from Blue Falcon. And I know if I recall, you're working on something that's more Marine Corps centric, I believe, aren't you?
Yes, sir. We're gonna do some early war, that kind of grayish blue color, that a one-off bottle to kind of complement our 3-paint set for that that bluish gray early war Midway color that they had on them.
I've already got the Japanese set.
Me too. I love it.
Yeah, it's good stuff. Well, look, we really appreciate you guys coming on. That's really, I think you just touched on the thing that's one of my biggest joys with Blood Red Skies is it's causing me to kind of stumble and trip on all these things that I never would have explored otherwise, and it's been a ton of fun. I appreciate you guys contributing to that. Thanks for your insight and knowledge on these aircraft and helping us learn a bit more about it. If you are enjoying these episodes, please let us know. Check us out on our website, leadpursuit.net. Check us out on Facebook, Instagram, all the stuff. We appreciate you listening, and we'll catch up with you on another day. Yeah, well, that's part of my my whole introduction. I'll probably use the words history light, as you're fond of saying.
Yeah, now we
also
changed
just
it, right? It's not History Light anymore.
Oh, it's
History White Claw.
History White Claw, yeah.